the bells. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Councillor Peter Candlish and I'm the Cabinet Member for Transport. Before we start, we have a little bit of the usual housekeeping information to go through. If the fire alarm sounds continuously, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts and assemble at the Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal's regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. And please can everyone use the microphones, and importantly, and this is for me too, remember to switch them off when they have finished, otherwise the camera will remain on you. We're going to do some introductions first of all, so that we know everyone who is here. And I'm just going to go round, starting on my left with...
Peter Earl, City Solicitor.
Alison Harper, Local Democracy Officer.
And we'll jump down to the front row and then work our way back.
Councillor Graham Heaney, Labour Group Spokesman for Transport.
Councillor Simon Bosher, Conservative Group Spokesman for Transport.
Councillor Emily Strudwick, Portsmouth Independent Spokesperson and also Chair of Licensing.
Nikki Humphreys, Licensing Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Gareth James, Transport Strategy Team Leader for Portsmouth City Council.
Denise Bastow, Parking Office Manager, Portsmouth City Council.
Ian Myhill, Rotating Manager, Portsmouth City Council.
Natalia Wuszczyk, Active Travel Officer.
Stacey Ranscombe, Highways PFI Network Coordinator, Portsmouth City Council.
Richard Stocks, PFI Deputy Contract Manager, Technical.
Eleni Olasoglu, Highways PFI Technical Officer.
Paul Darlow, Traffic and Network Manager, Portsmouth City Council.
Felicity Tidbury, Assistant Director for Transport, Portsmouth City Council.
And Councillor George Magic of the Paulsgrove Ward doing a deputation.
I should have included the instruction to switch it on at the relevant moment as well as off at inappropriate moments. Okay, so the first item is apologies. I don't think we have any apologies that we need to record. Are there any declarations of interest that we need to record?
Chair of Licensing.
Anything more on that? No. So I think we're going to move to the first item on the agenda. And this is a follow-up to a report that was called in for review by a scrutiny panel. And this was about my decision in October 24 to not increase further the number of dedicated bus lanes open to PHV vehicles from what it is at the moment. And as a brief reminder, I decided that on the basis that I saw no hard evidence that was provided that proved that this would be a benefit to the transport network of the city overall. No evidence that this would improve road safety, and indeed some concerns that would not, and I took a precautionary principle. And finally, and probably crucially, that there was no budget to do the work, to do any of that work at that time, regardless of the merit of that proposal. So given those points above, I had agreed with the officer's recommendation to not expand the number of bus lanes open to PHVs. But the scrutiny panel, when they reviewed the decision, took a different position and asked that we look at this decision again. And officers have prepared a new report addressing some of the issues that, they have raised. So I'd like to ask Gareth James, the Transport Strategy Team Leader, to just take us through that report.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, everybody. Just to quickly summarise, and this will be echoing a couple of comments that Councillor Candlish has already made. So a report was presented at this meeting last October, during which I outlined the officer's recommendation not to extend authorisation to council licensed, Portsmouth City Council licensed PHVs to use more bus lanes than the 5 that had already been made permanent following the trial in 2022-23. And the recommendation was approved by the Cabinet Member. That decision was subsequently called into the Council Scrutiny Management Panel in November. Concerns that the decision may have been taken without adequate or accurate information were upheld, so it was referred to the Cabinet Member for reconsideration, along with the nature of its concerns to be addressed. So this report outlines the response to each of the 5 concerns raised. This is in section 4 of the report, and reaffirms the validity of the decision that was taken by the Cabinet Member in October. However, it also notes that during the intervening period, officers have identified an opportunity to partially overcome the major concern the Cabinet Member had cited in making his original decision, namely the lack of budget and the fact that it would have meant defunding other key transport priorities and projects. Through synergies with the Council's emerging bus service improvement programme, it's now anticipated that Council licensed PHV access could be enabled to the Cosham Interchange and Northern Road bus lanes, with the estimated £71,500 cost of doing so to be fully funded by that bus service improvement programme. And finally, it's therefore recommended that the Cabinet Member approves this further feasibility work to be carried out as soon as possible. Thank you.
We now have some deputations to be made, and I'd like to first call upon Councillor Madgwick to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Candlish. It's good to see this report back. I've read through it, and this is a much better report from an outsider's perspective. Certainly 4.2 is really good. It gives a real clear breakdown on the finances, where everything's going. I think that's really positive, because we can see really where that breakdown is, which I think is important when we're making decisions. I do still, and I've mentioned this before, I do still question why, I know obviously this is going around in blocks, but I do question why we've got to fund such a high CCTV level when there's not already CCTV in some of the approved bus lanes that already exist, and especially in other cities and towns we don't have CCTV cameras on PHV allowed bus lanes. Currently in some of the bus lanes there's none, and obviously if somebody went into those we would never know it anyway. So I do find that a bit of a strange thing. That's a personal thing. On 5.6, obviously, is it 5.6? Let's have a look. Oh no, sorry, 5.10. Obviously, it lists the names of the buses that were roads that were being considered before. I've just noted that obviously Cosham Interchange wasn't in that original list, and I just wanted to know if you know at any point, Councillor Candlish, whether you'd mind asking the officers why that's happened to pop up now as like a new place. I think that one's quite a good idea, because I think that will cut out loads of traffic. I think I was speaking to a resident the other day, and obviously you'll know only too well the traffic issues around that roundabout, certainly in peak times in the morning and the evenings, and I think that is very valuable. I think that's a really good thing. So that's definitely welcomed. I just wondered why it was omitted before and why it's suddenly come to the forefront now. I do have a little slight issue with the wording of the recommendation on 2.1. Not that I'll die on a sword over it, but I just think that it kind of doesn't really note the concerns that were raised by the Scrutiny Management Panel, kind of dismisses them as invalid. I just think the wording of it doesn't really kind of give the Scrutiny Management Panel the respect that it rightly deserves when making a decision. But once again, that's just a preference. I do think there's two things that I'll mention. Is number one, obviously, before we set the budget in February, when we approached the financial director, obviously we approached him with this money, because obviously the officer said here that the stumbling block mainly is the money, and obviously the priority programme and stuff, which we respected. And we did approach the director of finance to try and get this added into our budget amendment. And I was reassured, not by Councillor Candlish, but I was reassured by the leader of the council that they had found the money and we don't need to put it in our budget because the money had been sourced elsewhere. And as I say, that definitely wasn't Councillor Candlish that said that to me, but it was the leader of the council. So I'm interested, maybe this isn't a question that could be answered today, but I'm interested why that hasn't come to fruition, or what's changed in between that meeting we had in February where we were assured the money would be there and now. The only thing that I'll say that I'm slightly disappointed with, and this isn't in the report, is kind of the lack of consultation with the taxi trade, the private hire trade, before publishing this report. Both the Uber rep and the Hackney rep have approached us and said that they kind of are not overly happy with this. They felt that they would have appreciated to be asked about what maybe their priorities were. So say, for example, I don't know how your financial system works, but say you had, we could only afford 2 bus lanes, for example. It would have maybe been nice to do a consultation with them to say, look, we can only afford 2 or 3. Which of these preferences would you prefer? And try and get a bit of feedback from them, because at the end of the day, these are the ones that are going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. And I know there's no trade here today, but I am aware that they're a little disgruntled about that and a little upset about it, because they feel that they could have had some kind of impact in that decision. But as I say, look, you know, I like a good moan in regards to this, but I always welcome changes and investment into the projects. And, you know, although I know some of the trade are not very happy about this, I certainly welcome it. It's certainly better than nothing, you know. And I do think, I do welcome the Cosham interchange one. So, but thank you for your time, Councillor Candish. I appreciate you bringing it back. And this is definitely a better and more thoughtful report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madgwick. We now have a deputation that I believe, Alison, you're going to read out for us. So if you could introduce who the report is from and then go through the report. Deputation.
Okay, so this is from Peter Sutherland, who's a trade representative for the Uber PHV drivers. So he says, as a trade representative for Uber PHV drivers and being the prime mover behind our continuous requests for access to the city's bus lanes for Portsmouth registered PHVs, it is disappointing to note, yet again, although not unexpectedly, that our most reasonable requests are continually denied. It would appear that the Cabinet Member for Transport is now offering access to 2 areas in Cosham as some sort of olive branch to the trade, whilst being quite determined not to allow the wider access that we have been seeking for years. A former Cabinet Member for Transport begrudgingly granted access to 5 bus lanes, albeit on a trial basis. That trial, despite being extended several times, proved to be a great success and most certainly saved on journey times in some areas with the associated reduction in pollution. It is noted that, without any consultation with the trade, it is now being suggested that access for PHVs be granted for the Cosham interchange and Northern Road bus lanes. It is also noted that the potential cost of such a project is estimated at £38,500. This recommendation is pointless and a waste of public money. As the appointed trade representative for Uber drivers and, I repeat, prime mover behind our request for PHV access to bus lanes, I can assure the Cabinet Member for Transport that we can easily provide a prioritised list of bus lanes that we would like access to, bus lanes that would actually provide real-time travel savings whilst causing minimal disturbance to buses. Access to some bus lanes would actually offer no real benefits to the trade. Some bus lanes are actually barely used by buses either. After consultation with colleagues, I respectfully ask the Cabinet Member to note that in our opinion, 1, access to the areas mentioned offer no real benefit to the trade. 2, we are extremely disappointed that the Cabinet Member has not sought any consultation with us on this recommendation. 3, we find the recommendation for Cosham Interchange and Northern Road bus lanes to be a totally pointless exercise. 4, we actually believe that access to the Cosham Interchange will cause greater disruption to buses. 5, we recommend that the Cabinet Member for Transport withdraw this recommendation, thus saving the city £38,500. 6, we urgently request that the Cabinet Member enter into consultation with the PHV trade before making any further such recommendations. I sincerely trust that due note of my comments are taken by the Cabinet Member for Transport. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. And as ever, it's not hard to find 2 sides of a coin on a transport issue. But I'm now going to turn now to my colleagues in the room to ask if they have any questions on the report. So questions first and then comments. Councillor Bosher just got his hand up first.
Okay, so first of all, slight little gripe. When there's a map, I don't know if this is normal in transport, but it says like brown lines. It's black and white, so I can't see what you're talking about. So if we could have it in colour, so it makes it a little bit easier. It says that you spoke to the Portsmouth Cycle Forum. Why did you not speak to the trade? And then also you've included it saying 71,500, but actually, like Peter Sutherland's just mentioned, it's only going to cost 38,500 because the 33,000 you have to do anyway. So why is that included in the price?
Yeah, so to answer the two questions in turn. So first of all, Recycle Forum hasn't been engaged with about these new proposals, so they would be, as will the PHV trade. Yeah, hopefully that clarifies that. The second question, again, it's in the report. I think it does state that the £71,500 that does include the 2 cameras, but those other costs are still required to enable the PHV access. So that's as we've discussed in the previous meeting and tried to make very clear. There's the other elements around the signs and lines, the road safety audit compliance. Those things are all needed. It's just that the cameras, which are the most expensive individual element of allowing PHV access, they would be able to be consistent with the bus service improvement programme. That's why we're able to fund these 2 lanes.
It says work required even if PHV access was not enabled. You've included that, but you're saying you do need that. On the report, 6.5, subtotal, work required even if PHV access is not required. So is it needed or is it not?
Yeah, that's correct. So it says subtotal work required even if PHV access were not enabled. So to have camera enforcement, you need the 2 cameras regardless. So that's the 33,000 that you would need for the camera enforcement, but then those additional bits that total 38,500 are the extra that's needed for the PHV access.
So the total is only 38,500 for PHV use?
So the total funding for the project is £71,500, but 33,000 of that would be needed if we were to prioritise those 2 bus lanes just through the bus service improvement programme, camera enforcement project, but they weren't included. It's only because we were exploring the synergies with that team that we were able to find a way to take these 2 lanes forward. They weren't included on the camera enforcement project. There was no overlap between the lanes that were identified for the bus service improvement programme, camera enforcement, with the 11 lanes that we were looking at for PHV access.
If I take a swing at it. So to put the enforcement cameras in, and that is also in the report, something I've asked for is that wherever possible, we now move to a position of having cameras enforcing bus lanes. Now that isn't the case in all our bus lanes at the moment. We don't have a clear plan that enables us to say how we're going to do that because we don't have the money for it. However, through the BSIP scheme, we are going to be able to do some of them, and one of those is the Cosham interchange. So that is a cost that is associated with putting in the cameras and having the enforcement there. If we only did the BSIP scheme and we only put the cameras in for that, that would be the 33,000. If we added to that to do the other work around changing it so that there was something specifically for the PHV trade to be able to enter into those bus lanes as well, there are additional costs, and that's what it's trying to break out.
So to clarify, you do need 33,000 to put the PHVs in there? So the wording on this is wrong?
No, yeah, just let me try to, I think
I get that you need to put, there's no cameras on there now, you need to put cameras on there, but the wording says it's not required if you're not allowing PHV access, so, but you're saying it is.
So if we were not taking these 2 forwards as part of this project, then the likelihood is that budget would not be spent on these 2 lanes. So the cameras would not be going in on these lanes. It would be going to another part of the BSIP programme, but it's because we were trying to explore a way to take this forwards. So the work, when it says work required, even if PHV access were not enabled, that doesn't mean that work would be happening. It means that to enable CCTV enforcement of those lanes, which is, as Councillor Canlish said, is an aspiration, budget permitting, across more bus lanes, we would need to do that anyway, but without this PHV project, we wouldn't be looking to do it in these 2 particular lanes Does that clarify? Sorry for miscommunicating before.
No, that makes more sense. And then just to clarify, the Cosham interchange, it's not been highlighted as much as I think it should be. It means that Hackney Carriage are allowed to use them as well, because currently Hackney Carriage aren't allowed. So just to confirm that.
Yeah, I can confirm that, and that I can also answer the question that Councillor Madgwick raised, if you like, Chair, with regard to why that hadn't been included on the original list. And it's precisely because when the list was first being scoped some years ago, the lanes that didn't allow Hackney carriages were not considered in scope for this project. And it was actually when we were going through looking at the 11 lanes and seeing where there was a where it could be complementary to the BSIP programme aims. And so we've identified Northern Road, and then officers said, well, could we not make it that excellent link through to Cosham Station and the interchange by allowing that? And when we discussed that with BSIP colleagues, then it was seen that actually allowing Hackney carriages through there could be done. I mean, this is all subject to further feasibility and consultation and so forth. But that was why it popped onto the list, because it was so complementary to the Northern Road to give that access through there.
And if I put one further build to that build, which is I also have an aspiration and a direction that key transport interchanges like Cosham, we want more and more types of transport to be well linked into those things, because actually when people do journeys, they often use more than one form of transport. So the more we can tie these things in together, the better. Any more questions on this, Simon? Councillor Bosher.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll probably start with Cosham Interchange, if I can, because you've added that in as one of the two. Can you just explain to me, perhaps, Gareth, what the rationale behind Cosham Interchange actually is when it didn't feature beforehand?
Yeah, so just to elaborate on what I was saying before, Councillor, it was so Northern Road in isolation, we believe could be beneficial to the PHV trade. That was, of course, one of the 11 lanes that was being looked at throughout the whole process, and the PHV trade representatives, including the Uber representatives, had supported that being on the list. But when we looked at it, we thought that it would actually add a lot more value to the PHV trade and those benefits that Councillor Canlish just outlined in terms of the sort of multimodal interchange link up there, by having that Cosham interchange, adjacent to it, because then it works to really help to give the southbound PHV trade coming in to Cosham interchange that access. So otherwise, they have to go quite a long way round, I believe.
Yeah, I have. Perhaps I'm using the wrong word here, but I see Cosham Interchange as being one of the two bus lanes that we're talking about as perhaps a little bit of a con, really, because it would only really access into the Highbury estate other than being on the wrong side of the station car park in Cosham High Street. And in my experience, and I use the train quite a lot, most of the taxi drivers will go in through past and down Cosham High Street and drop you off in the station. They wouldn't come back up the other way. Now, taxi drivers, if they are going into the Highbury estate, it's probably quicker for them to go straight down and come straight back up again, if they've got that, because they're not going to use the Cosham interchange necessarily to go in there and then tie themselves into the complete traffic chaos that we have coming out by McDonald's, basically. I would have argued that if you're going to include the Cosham interchange with the Northern Road bit, that will be one, because it is one, because the buses turn there, and therefore you've got the opportunity to have another one other than these two, because these two are literally, they're linked together. And I would suggest, Chairman, that if you're going to do Northern Road, you include Cosham interchange as one thing, so that, because the taxi drivers are not going to go down that particular one-way bit by choice, which then frees up the opportunity to say, let's look somewhere else in the city. Because what I didn't hear in all that was that taxi drivers have actually said, please, can we have Cossam interchange as the opportunity? And I suspect that anybody is not going to go down Northern Road and back up and drop somebody on the wrong side of the station, where in fact there is no drop-off point for them. Taxi drivers go to the car park. They come south down Cossam High Street. That's the logic. So I'd ask perhaps, it's entirely up to you, but I would treat that as one thing, because one goes cap in hand with the other and looks somewhere else. Because I think to say, hey, look, we're adding 2 more, actually we aren't, because to use the word again, I think it's a bit of a con, to be quite honest, because they're inextricably linked. But that's my comment on that. The other one, Gareth, and perhaps you can explain this to me, because perhaps I'm being a bit simple. Chapter Magic mentioned it, 2.1 in the recommendation, and reaffirms the validity of the decision that was taken by the Cabinet Member for Transport on the 24th of October 2024. What does that actually mean? Because that decision was actually called into scrutiny. Scrutiny rejected it, which is why we are sat here. So clearly, that decision taken on the 24th of October is not a valid decision. So what does validity of that decision actually mean?
Let me ask Peter Belf to weigh in, and then I'll give my
on the face of it, it's just an inaccuracy, isn't it? It doesn't mean anything. You know, you're here to do a fresh decision, which is what you're doing. The fact the recommendation's been put doesn't mean it has to be adopted. You can amend it, you can do what you like with it. The truth of it is that it might say something, for example, having considered further information, you know, the report before you augments and expands upon what was put on the last decision meeting, for example. It doesn't take you very far, does it?
If I add my 2 pennyworth to it, is I'm expecting at the end of this to be asked to make a statement about the whole piece, which will include a reflection on that original decision.
If I can, Chairman, and thanks, Peter, for the solicitor speak.
Pleasure.
But you're not reaffirming what you're asking. If you follow the process through, the Cabinet Member made a decision on the 24th of October. It was called in on the basis of inaccurate information and insufficient information. It went through scrutiny management, and scrutiny management agreed that it should be, the call-in was successful and it should be brought back again. So therefore, the decision on the 24th of October is not valid, because you're making that decision again here today. So what you're essentially saying in that 2.1 is, I made the decision on this day. Yes, it was called in, but actually I think my decision was valid and I don't agree with scrutiny management. That's the interpretation that I have on 2.1. And I would argue that you actually put a full stop after 11th of November 2024 meeting, and you delete everything that says and reaffirms, and just get rid of that bit, because it is noting that it was called in and that was it, and here we are again. And just get rid of that bit. That's my view. It's your decision.
And I'll come back to it.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, Councillor Bocher and Councillor Madrick, who also made comments around that part of the report. I think that something that maybe will be helpful for you to both note is that although we're reaffirming that Councillor Candlish had the necessary information to make the decision at the time, that doesn't mean that there's not things that I can take on board to make a report more useful for yourselves in future. So I think that as officers, in the past sometimes we're being criticised for War and Peace reports, where we've kind of included things that have been in previous reports and other materials, and we've been told that it was superfluous. So maybe this time it was too streamlined. So there was information that had gone to the external review panel, for example, which of course Councillor Candlish had seen, which included more detail around what we'd heard back from other councils like Southampton that wasn't in the report, and it wasn't that the decision maker didn't have it, it just that it wasn't in the report. So, you know, this is all useful feedback. We always try to make the reports as you know, comprehensive and yet succinct as we can, so that they're as useful for you as they can be. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and if I build on that as the person in whose name or to whom this report has come, I read this as, and I am not a lawyer, I tend to be more focused on kind of the final bits about the action that's arising, although I do understand the importance sometimes of full stops, semicolons, and phrasing things exactly right, and occasionally the lawyers have to be brought in to do longer sentences. So I apologise if that's not the way that was read on that one. My understanding from it was that the basis of the decision that I had reported to was being brought back by the council officers, and they were supplementing it with the additional information. That's the way I had read it. Anyway.
Yeah, I think, unless I misheard Gareth, I think it goes to what I was actually saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Gareth, but what you were saying is actually you had all the information and you were privy to other information to actually make the decision that you did back on the 24th of October. Is that what you were...
Yeah, so it was, for example, and it's all clear in section 4 of the report, so what's captured in there is information that had been presented to Councillor Canlish, some of which directly to him, some of which had gone to the external review panel, but wasn't captured in the same detail in the original report. It wasn't omitted, but it wasn't in the same amount of detail. So yeah, I hope if there's anything in section 4 that isn't clear, because that is the section that responds to those scrutiny management concerns, then I'll obviously be happy to to try to answer any questions on those.
Yeah. Any other questions? Councillor Heaney.
Thank you. I have a few questions, then I will have a comment, obviously, after I've done the questions. I'm wanting to look at how the reporters responded to the scrutiny panel's requests. In particular, I want to start with number 1, which was about asking for findings from other local transport about how they operate their bus lanes and what experience learning they have from that. The response in 4.1 describes the fact that Southampton City Council allow PHVs in bus lanes. Presumably, they have not indicated that there are any problems and they are not seeking to change their current bus lane policy. Is that correct?
Sorry, there was a whistling silence there. Could you repeat your question, because I didn't quite get the question?
Southampton City...
Sorry, apologies.
We had the report describing the fact that Southampton City Council allow PHV access to some bus lanes. And my question was, is there any indication that they are going to change their policy on that at all?
So I will look to for help to answer this. I think I am personally not aware of places which are particularly changing their policy, and one of the things that was asked for was to basically do an audit and find out what other people were doing in other places. To the extent that that is possible to do, because there hasn't been, it's not so easy to get hold of this information. Desktop research has been done, questions have been asked, but only so much information has been gathered. The information that has been gathered basically shows that there's a very mixed picture. I don't know if anyone knows if any of those are considering changes. Gareth?
Yeah, there's not really a lot to say in response to that question. I think the people that we've spoken to at other councils, some of those decisions go back quite a long time, and they're still in a position of not having a good evidence base to quantify the benefits or the disbenefits. It's just a sort of legacy implementation from earlier decisions. I think probably the one thing that may be useful is just to say that in Brighton, that they did say, because they were one of the first to do it, I believe, and they did say that the schemes that they are working on today, if they were allowing PHV access, then they would be looking to have a segregated cycle lane where possible, rather than having, you know, all those road users mixing.
Okay, well, you've answered my second question, which was about Brighton, because they're not presumably changing, but they would do it slightly differently if they did. The other part of this is we contacted the Association of Transport Coordinating Officers and got 2 replies. Who were those replies from, and what were those replies?
Gareth, this one's for you.
If I could just have a couple of minutes to dig that out. I do have it somewhere. I'll find it for you. The 2 replies were not enlightening, which is why there's nothing in here, but I'll just find out who they were.
Well, if that had been written, I wouldn't have had to ask the question, would I?
I mean, I think that the bigger point here is the one that it isn't an obvious area of much activity. There's no clear trend, and it is not a desperately well recorded or changing area. Anyway, whilst Gareth is trolling back through his emails to try to find the 2 things, are there any other questions to kind of start the record going?
I suppose the other question I wanted to ask relates to a previous report. The report that we had or that the previous cabinet member had in 30th of January had a recommendation which said it approves commissioning independent road safety audits to assess the implications of PCC licence PHVs being permitted to utilise a further 22 bus lanes specified in section 8 of the report, and to determine the necessary mitigation measures and implementation costs. So were any of those RSAs for the roads listed in that report ever carried out?
So did we do road safety audits on the ones
on the basis of that
progressed?
recommendation? Yes.
I'll confess, I did just miss the start of that question while I was digging out this email, but were you talking about the 11 bus lanes that were considered in the last report, whether the road safety audits?
I was talking about the January 24 report, which approves commissioning independent RSAs to assess the implications of the additional bus lanes, and I wanted to know whether any of those have been carried out. That was January 24, and I'm aware that the cabinet member changed in May.
Yeah, certainly all of the road safety audits, both during the trial and during the this process of looking at additional lanes, all the ones that we had said we were going to carry out have all been completed. Yeah, is the answer. They have been done. Yes. And to answer the previous question, it was actually Southampton and Brighton were the 2 respondents who, of course, are mentioned in there. We did also get in touch with Reading, and they had undertaken the trial some years previously, but we don't have a report on that.
Any more questions?
Well, I'd like the opportunity to have a look at those RSAs and see what they actually said about those bus lanes, because I wasn't aware they'd been completed. We were certainly given no results of those when the decision was made in October, which I thought would potentially have been relevant information. If the RSAs had already been carried out in October, I'm wondering why that information wasn't available for the decision on whether to proceed or not proceed, because it's a relevant factor. But I won't take up that now. I'll pursue that later.
Okay, with that generous offer of taking it up later, are there any other questions now? Or else I'm going to move to comments. Any comments people want to make at this point?
This has been an interesting process. It's been 7 months since we had the original report and the referral to the scrutiny panel and then the referral back. What is interesting is that there seems to be a concession in this report that actually it is helpful to the PHV trade to be able to use bus lanes, because there is the new proposal for Northern Road and the Cosham interchange, and obviously that is an attempt to sort of meet the demands and concerns. So there seems to be an acknowledgement, at least from officers, and presumably from the Cabinet member, that there is some benefit to having PHVs in bus lanes. The problem, I think, with this is that this has probably been a bit of a saga going back 2 years, which probably also highlights differences of opinion within the administration about what actually to do with this. Because if you go back and look at the history, and I'm going to do another history lesson for you because I know you love them. When this was first proposed, the Cabinet member had somewhat reluctantly, I think, agreed to a trial because the leader of the council at the time seemed to be wanting the Cabinet member to take action on this. So it seems, from my understanding, that a trial was agreed. The trial that was agreed, however, was a fairly limited trial and one that was done to minimise costs because the routes chosen were relatively short, not particularly representative of bus lanes in the city, and ones to easily monitor. Now, I can understand why that might have been done if there'd been a reluctance to bring this policy in. But the problem is the trial was not representative. I made this point at the time, that we didn't have a proper understanding of the different types of bus routes that would be affected. And it was pretty obvious that the trial, given the routes chosen, was more than likely to come up with a no detriment result, i.e. no safety issues, maybe not necessarily any major improvements in timings, partly because of the shortness of some of the routes. So the administration sort of set themselves up with having done a trial, which then proved not negative, not with safety concerns. And the logic would be, well, if there's no problem with it, why not go ahead? And of course, the Cabinet member, which of course changed by the time we get to January 24, did follow that logic, having agreed the trial. He then proposed that we should seek to look at a number of other bus routes to see if there was. Now, the reason you had to do that was because the first trial wasn't really a representative trial, so you couldn't use the results of the trial to say, well, this is a similar bus route to that, so you could use it. So there was a necessity to have almost like a route-by-route trial, an assessment to make sure that they were available. But at least from the point of view of the PHV trade and the point of view of what we'd actually already experienced, that was seen as a positive. However, when we get to October, the decision was not to proceed with that. Now, clearly there were differences of view within the Liberal Democrat administration. The former member was in favour of going for this and wanted to see positively whether it could be extended. The previous member wasn't, but was persuaded to do a trial. And the current member, Councillor Candish, is obviously not in favour. His argument doesn't rest necessarily on the evidence of the harm, no harm. It rests on the issue of financing and priorities. And what he actually came up with at the last meeting in October was very interesting because he said that this was not a priority. PHVs in buses was not a priority. And as far as he was concerned, everything else in the transport plan was a priority and PHVs in bus lanes were not. So he was very determined that he wasn't going to follow the evidence. He was going to say it was a funding decision and it was not a priority of his to fund this. This report slightly contradicts that position because now we've got a funding for the potential Northern Road and Cosham interchange bus lanes, but it's not being funded by PCC directly. It's coming out of the BSIP money. But it does actually acknowledge, as I said earlier, that there is some validity to having PHVs in bus lanes, some helpful validity in doing that. So we have a real policy problem, a lack of a decision-making about policy, a lack of resolution of policy, changing policy positions, contradicting previous positions, and I think the PHV trade probably, with some justification, feel somewhat hard done by because of the way this has been handled. It would have been much better if some clarity within the administration had already been established right from the beginning about, this is a citywide policy. Very often, citywide policies are debated at Cabinet. Why wasn't this a Cabinet decision about what they wanted to do? It would have produced much greater clarity about the decision, rather than this sort of in-out, change-it-all-about situation which we've got. Because we're now in a situation where we've got a relatively small number of bus lanes that will now continue to have PHVs because they're permanent. No guarantee that any others will ever be considered again because of the financing issues and the possibility that the BSIP will now fund another particular route. So it's a bit of a policy mess, and I think this could have been done a lot better. And I think there's some lessons to be learned about how this was done. When you're dealing with interest groups that obviously want change, you know, you can either say no, you can say yes, you can say we'll trial it. But we seem to have fallen between all of the stools in this one. We said no initially, then we said yes, we'll trial it. Then we said, well, the trial's okay, but we're just not going to go ahead with it. And actually, yes, we're going to do a bit of one as a bit of a sop, but we're not really going to do anything after this. So this is where we are, and it's a bit of a mess. So those are my comments.
Councillor Studwick.
Thank you. I think my kind of comments is more that the trade should have been in consultation for this. It's affecting them. It's not none of us are PHV drivers or Hackney Carriage, and they're the ones that this is going to affect. They should have been at the forefront. If you were not choosing the 11 and choosing new ones, they should have been consulted. They're very honest and upfront and respectful, and if you say no and give them real reasons, they do respect that. And they do find this slightly offensive, and the ones that I have managed to speak to about this aren't happy with this selection. But I will play devil's advocate. It's better than nothing, and it might ease just slightly, but they should have absolutely have been at the forefront of that. And to second what Councillor Boster said about 2.1, because it does undermine, I feel, what the scrutiny management decision was, and I feel that, Gareth, you didn't, in your explanation, it kind of actually agreed with that point, rather than just saying that you noted it. And that's all I've got to say for now.
Okay, thank you. So as Councillor Heaney has already pointed out, I am not a historian, and I'm more interested in looking forward than I am looking back. Is everything always perfect? No, I work in local government and I work with the limitations and the possibilities that I can do. So one of the possibilities that has emerged has been the possibility of using BSIP funds to do things that we couldn't otherwise do. So the comments around which lanes we do, where we do it, there are some drivers behind that. The second one was whether I have a view or whether the administration should have a view. I would say in religious terms, I am agnostic on the issue. My biggest problem when the original report came through, and to be honest, it continues to this day, is I like to be evidence-led. And because in many ways it makes decision-making easier because the evidence is clear about doing something or not doing something. Truthfully, this is an area where that evidence base is not complete or strong, and therefore you end up with people making judgment decisions. People are different, circumstances are different, time goes on. So I now have to do two things, I think. Firstly is to respond to the to what happened in October and the decision I made there, and then secondly to look at the option that is being brought to the table this time round. I do listen, by the way, and hear the point about is it one or is it two, because they're so close together. The costings and stuff relate to the proposals that are being put together. And in terms of the consultation process, actually nothing has gone forward. So the next step is to move to feasibility. The feasibility step is when formal input is sought. We've got a very strong deputation, so I know what one opinion is going to be. We heard some other opinions, better than nothing, this could be a strong idea. This is what the feasibility process will discover, along with the technical things about just checking out what needs to be done. So, first of all, if I go back to after more digging has been done, and behind what Gareth is saying is a relatively small numbers of paper, there is a lot of officer time and work to try to find out more information. But ultimately, I am going to say that little has changed since my decision in October. No one has been able to demonstrate to me that there is a clear benefit to the city from making bus lanes, more bus lanes open to PHVs. And indeed, the PHV trade have not come forward with any more evidence to proved that point. I hear assertions, people have views, but there is no hard evidence about that. I've continued to receive concerns from various stakeholders about the potential for safety concerns. Frankly, those are assertions as well. There is slim data on which to base the decision based on that. And the final key barrier was cost. So there was no money in last year's budget. We haven't put any more money into this year's budget, but an opportunity has come up through BSIP to do something. Doing something enables us to build a database, look to see whether a scheme is useful or something. We don't have the wherewithal to make a big decision, as Councillor Heaney perhaps would like us to make. Perhaps if a large sum of money became available, we would be able to consider that. But at the moment, from where we sit, we certainly don't. So, net, I am not going to change my decision based on the October report. If I look at what is new in this report, and I won't go through other than the Caution one, it looks to me like an idea that is worth exploring. We could have the money to do it if it proves to be a good idea. We have to establish both the feasibility and the desirability of it. If that is positive, I would say we should go forward. If that comes forward and is either technically infeasible or not desired by a majority of people, or something similar to that, then I think we would not to do it. At the end of that, I am therefore going to say that I'm going to take there are some comments we will take away outside of this and some query items which I think will be followed up upon, but I am going to maintain the decision that was made in October and accept the recommendation that is embedded in this report. And with that, I'm going to move on to item 2 on the agenda. Not item 2, it is of course item 4, which is lane rental. And there I'm going to ask Stacey Ranscombe, the Highways PFI Network Coordinator, to take us through a short presentation.
Thank you, Councillor. This report is to inform on the proposals to implement lane rental. This is an additional measure to control streetworks and roadworks in the city. So it is recommended that the member approves the progression of a lane rental scheme application to the DFT and support the use of a specialist lane rental consultant to complete the necessary steps. Road and streetworks in Portsmouth are currently managed via a permit scheme. These have an applicable fee attached, of which contributes to the running of a cost-neutral scheme. Lane rental is proposed as a potential solution to encourage behaviour change amongst works promoters on the road. It is a bolt-on to the current permit system. Its aim is to reduce the impact of works on the busiest roads at the busiest times only. It would work alongside the existing permit scheme as mentioned. This will be carried out through charges of up to £2,500 per day on critical parts of the highway network. 50% of surplus funds generated from lane rental operations must be used on projects that reduce the disruption and other adverse effects caused by streetworks. The further 50% can now be spent on highways maintenance with a specific focus on potholes. Using Southampton City Council's consultation as a benchmark, a net income from lane rental charges is estimated around £700,000 per annum. This is considered our closest comparator. However, this will be assessed further with a full cost benefit analysis in the process of application. The DFT are currently taking applications twice a year, so we are aiming to submit in April 2026 for rollout in autumn of that year. In line with the actions and recommendations of other local authorities, it is proposed that a specialised consultant is assigned to complete these actions. Thank you.
I'm gobsmacked there are no deputations on this one, Peter, to be quite honest. Perhaps I'll start with a simple question. It probably isn't. If we go into devolution,
I can assure the councillor that it is not a simple question.
Sorry. And we join with neighbouring authorities, which is going to be the likelihood. Do our immediate neighbours use a permit scheme or a licence, or a road licence scheme at the moment?
So it's in addition to a permit scheme. So all local neighbouring authorities use a permit scheme. This is a bolt-on. So the permit scheme will still continue to run, and this, so lane rental is just in addition to that. And all our neighbouring authorities have a permit scheme. Southampton are now currently consulting for a lane rental, and Hampshire are in the process of also putting forward a lane rental scheme.
Right, so it sounds like everybody's sort of getting their ducks in a row ahead of devolution by the sound of it. Okay, that's fine. I don't fundamentally disagree with this. I think it's the right way to go, if I'm brutally honest with it. £2,500 per day on critical parts of the network. So some roads will command more than others depending on the nature of the road. And so therefore, if I'm reading that correctly, if somebody says we're going to be working there for 4 days, it's going to be potentially 10 grand. It's not an overrun or anything like that. But if they do go longer, it will be an overrun, will it? So they'll be charged extra. So if they ended up 5, 6 and 7 days, it'll be, yeah, Paul's nodding at me, so yeah, okay, fair enough.
It's actually a charge per day. There's no overrun, so there will be a charge per day.
Depending on how long
there'll be a
there.
cap on certain works, such as replacement works, which are known to take a number of weeks, so there will be a charge cap, but it's a charge per day. So the permit scheme, currently, you have to pay for a permit, but it's for the one permit, it's not per day. You pay to be on the road for those works and the length of those works. A lane rental scheme is a charge per day in addition to the permit.
Cool. So, well, as a light-hearted aside, if Aquin decide to come up through the road, I hope we're going to charge them £2,500 per day and not cap anything, but that's a side issue. On page 5, 6.3, 2 bullet points there, bullet point 3 and bullet point 4. A review of the city's network characterised as traffic sensitive must be completed. What does traffic sensitive mean? Because I'd argue every resident and every street would say that their road is traffic sensitive. But perhaps I want to know what the engineering terminology of traffic sensitive is.
Okay, so at the moment, roads are classified as traffic sensitive via the permit scheme, but this will be a review. So traffic sensitive is basically the strategic network, and it's to do with the busiest times, the busiest roads, strategic, emergency routes, off-peak, out of peak time, etc. But it also takes into account things as events and the summer period, etc.
But would that include the M275? Was that classed as part of Highways England and nothing to do with us then?
We're half and half.
Yeah, we have it from the sort of the bridge down, don't we, or something from memory? Potentially.
This is all to be obviously investigated with traffic congestion figures and data.
Right, so you're essentially talking roads like Easton Road, Copner Road, London Road, those sorts of roads.
Those would come to mind
as being
straight
obvious
away.
Traffic sensitive in that respect, okay. And also, perhaps bullet point 4, identification of the busiest, most impacted routes to be included within the scheme. But the bit that, in the brackets is the interesting bit, no more than 5% of the network. What does that mean? I think I know what that means in engineering term, but...
Yeah, so currently the DFT guidance is only 5% of your network can be included in the lane rental schemes. So it will only include 5%.
That's in linear meters or something like that, is it, in that respect?
I presume so, kilometres.
Or kilometres, yeah. So we take the total length of our network, which is probably quite substantial. I'm sure Paul's got the figure to hand, knowing Paul, but I think it's...
I mean, this is an interesting one, actually. So 5% is the figure that's published, although we do know that following the lead from some of the London boroughs, and, you know, Portsmouth has been likened to being, you know, as compact and dense as a London borough in the past, that actually some of the London boroughs have been pushing for like 50 to 60% of their total road network. Now, that's a big push on the DFT's 5% guidance, and certainly other counties that have been looking at this have been looking at 10 to 15. I think the key thing is, as Stacey said, this is about looking at the roads, looking at the evidence, and can we build an evidence base? You know, I don't think we'll be working for what's 5%. What we'll be looking is the evidence base and the data to say what is our road length, and then, you know, arguing our case on our application for that. If that's above 5%, I would be minded that we would push that. I don't think it's it's guidance. It's not a hard, you must not do more than 5. But you're going to have to evidence it and prove it.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I get that I'm probably asking a very simple question and there's a highly complicated answer to it. But, you know, if you say you've got 100 miles of roads, so therefore only sort of 5 miles of it qualify under this, then you could arguably look at some of things like Eastern Road, Albert Road, Copner Road, London Road. There's your 5% gone straight away, and then I'm sure there's a lot of wards in the city that could argue that they've got a significant road. I've got Havant Road in my thing, and that's probably as to why they and not us. And I think we need to see if we can push beyond that 5% to look at, if you like, the major arterial roads, I would argue, then that would be probably a better place to be. But I guess I'm just asking questions here for what does that actually mean in real terms, because we're going to be looking at that as in impacting our neighbourhoods as opposed to some mandarin sat in London that's going to be looking at statistics and percentages, which isn't where we really want to be. We want to be doing the right thing for our residents. Perhaps going off on a slight tangent, but it's related. How do we coordinate between the different utilities companies to make sure that we aren't painting white lines in a road one week and then somebody's digging it up the next?
So this is currently with COLAS under the PFI contract. So they carry out network coordination of all works on the road, and it is done via the permit scheme. So the permit scheme pulls everything together, third parties, council works, events, everything on the road.
Does it actually work though?
I'll step in on that one, and I would say, frankly, no, or not as well as it needs to. So we are in dialogue with, we've got Southern SGN coming in a couple of weeks' time to talk to them specifically about this, because what we want to have happen for our residents and the impact of decisions they make on the utilities, you know, is something which they don't give sufficient weight to. We think we need to try to persuade them to give more weight to it. That comes through in a number of different ways. It is better notification of planned works. It is better communication when emergency works come up. It comes through better definition of what an emergency is. An emergency to us might be different to an emergency to them. So we are in dialogue with them to try to improve those. Is it easy to do? No. If you look around the country, everyone complains about exactly what you are raising, Councillor Bosher, that residents are frustrated where they see perhaps the same piece of road being treated several times, or that a major piece of work is going on and people say, why don't you do and try and coordinate it? We do try to do that, and I'm sure that if we asked the officers, they could give you examples about where that has worked well. But it is not something that is easy to do. Actually, I think there's a real opportunity here, long term. There's not a party political thing, I think it's just a nation thing, that as we move to digital, long term, there must be better ways of coordinating this and putting different people's systems together, but it also requires people to have and to share what for them are confidential operational plans about how much they're planning to do and when. We would like to know more. We're trying to get more insight, but we only have so far that we can go at the moment.
I'd say it was a slightly loaded question on my part, because we had one in Drayton and Farlington recently where we've had Southern Gas Network going round, and it's not been emergency works. They've been doing a lot of replacements and a lot of gas connections into people's houses. those familiar with the Sunshine Tesco Junction, Lower Farlington, they had a lot of section along that towards St Andrew's Church all dug up, and they were directing people and also along towards Galt. They were directing traffic down Lower Farlington Road to go down and along Fitzherbert Road as the way round it. And blow me, down at the bottom of Lower Farlington Road and into the Bird Estate all down there, we had City Fibre road closed and digging it up, so we were sending people down to a road closed thing, and you think, don't these people actually talk to each other? And I noticed that we're about to start digging up a stretch of the Havant Road along by St Coleman's and Burrell and all the way along there, and yet 5 years ago that road collapsed because a sewer collapsed, and we ended up with a sinkhole there which was closed for absolutely weeks. It was all done properly and resurfaced and whatever, and it sort of begs the question, why are we going to dig it up again? What's the merit behind that? But that's probably something I need to find out off-grid. The only other thing that slightly bothers me with this, and I hope that restrictions are put in place when they actually want to do the work, is in a bullet point under 4.3. Carry out works outside of peak periods, making greater use of evenings and weekend working. Now, that says to me, my inbox fills up with residents' complaints when people are doing works to 10, 11 and 12 o'clock at night because they've got that 4-day window. So rather than do it what I would crudely call 9 to 5 or whatever they're doing it, or early evening, we might start getting heavy machinery works going on to 9, 10 o'clock at night and whatever. Will we still have that ability to be able to tell people what they can and can't do in those particular windows?
Yeah, absolutely. There'll still be permit restrictions, plus there is the environmental noise threshold, which will still be implemented, but in some cases it can't be avoided. It is a balancing act, and that is something that will be taken into account.
I totally get that. If you've got a gas leak, you're going to be there dealing with an emergency gas leak, but sometimes we get things, and again, I'm talking about my ward. We had a lot of changes to the top of the Eastern Road, Havant Road junction, and we had works that was going on till 9 o'clock in the evening with some heavy equipment there, doing a lot of resurfacing. My inbox, where residents were in complete misery, particularly if they've got young children, and it was during school weeks, if you like. So I hope that we don't get into a situation where people are trying to compress to save that money by doing what I would call noisy work late into the evenings, and we have a great deal of control as to what they can and can't. I know we do now, but I want to make sure that control would still be in place.
Yeah, and just in answer to your, going back to the lane rental scheme, does it work? Well, actually, we've had a discussion about this in the South East Traffic Managers Group, and Surrey were one of the first pathfinders for lane rental. They went live in 2021, and they've certainly had experience where utilities have collaborated together, shared traffic management, shared a road closure, and actually 3 of them worked at the same time to get the job done, which otherwise would have been potentially 1 month, then a second month, then a third month. So there is definitely evidence that the money of paying and splitting the costs between them works. But you're absolutely right. There is still controls that can be placed under the permit scheme that exists at the moment, and we do that at the moment and say you must not work at peak time, you must not work late at night, or you can do, you're absolutely right, if it's an emergency. And we've certainly had discussions, Councillor Candlish, about sometimes do we want it taking place over a week, 9 till 5, or do we want it done over a weekend, 24 hours a day to get the thing done? And I think they are conversations we are having with utility companies and councillors and Councillor Candlish about, okay, given the local residents, given the local situation, what is the best thing to happen?
I think I would say that we have an overriding objective that we always start from the point, to the extent that it is possible to do, how can we minimise the disruption to the residents whilst getting necessary work done? So, because you're right, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It is fundamentally disruptive work, and it's a case-by-case decision decision about what we need to do. We've offered, indeed, I think we've offered accommodation to people where we had to do night work and the housing was very close and it was a particular set of circumstances. But obviously that isn't something we're going to offer as a carte blanche, because otherwise, you know, it would be unsustainable.
I mean, so perhaps I just finish off my comment before anybody else jumps in. I mean, I don't disagree with this. I'm totally supportive of this going forward, and I can see the benefits you're outlining, Paul. It was purely from my perspective, wanting to understand what some of this actually meant. But I think it's probably long overdue, shall we say, in moving to a scheme that perhaps focuses the minds of the utilities to work more collaboratively. Easy for me to say on a Thursday afternoon together, and certainly if it's going to minimise the disruption and the perceived they're digging that hole for the 5th time this year sort of approach, then it's going to be the right thing to actually do. And if it's putting money into our coffers, then yeah, hey, what's not lots like?
Thank you. Well, I would say London Road, Copner Road and Northern Parade are very critical, Simon. I know I haven't read yours, but they're mine from my ward. Just in case I've missed it, it says charges up to 2,500 per day. How is that selected if it's up to, I'm guessing, or is it 2,500?
That's what's in the guidance, so we will get clarification on whether that's a maximum given or whether that's the standard charge.
So you'd be probably looking at staggering the price or just going for the maximum?
We need to do the full cost-benefit analysis, but our neighbours, I believe, are doing 2,500.
And then there was a mention of a cap. I'm guessing, what was the cap? That?
On duration of works for things such as gas main replacements, which aren't going to be a quick fix, and they generally take 4 to 6 weeks on the road, there's a cap on that.
And what is that cap?
It's not stated.
Right.
It would be up to us to have that within our written document for the lane rental.
Yeah, I support this. Anything to kind of make roadworks go as quickly as possible and just cause the least amount of disruption. If this works, then that's great. So that's all I've got to say, really.
Councillor Healy, any questions or comments? I think we've
questions actually. Yeah, I
one.
mean, Councillor Bosch's questions have been very helpful in illuminating exactly how this is going to work, so I don't need to ask those. I'm interested in the finances bit because I've looked at the list of the permit data there. Now, obviously, that's only doesn't break it down really. It talks about major works and between statutory undertaker and local authority, because obviously the statutory undertaker includes, you know, water, gas, electricity, whatever. Local authority presumably means local authority and PFI contract. So what I wanted to ask was, now there aren't probably going to be that many instances, but if, for example, a major bit of work is taking place on a road and COLAS are doing it, do they end up paying the lane rental charge, or do we as the local authority pay it?
Stacey, I can see your...
Yeah, it will include local authority works as well. We're not exempt.
So does it come out? Does it come out of the PFI? Do they pay it, the COLAS, or is it an extra charge that we have to pay because it wasn't in the contract?
Yeah, with respect to the contract, that's something that we'll have to go through, because obviously the contract was established some time ago, and this would be counted as a change to the contract as to whether or not, although COLAS will be charged to it, how that is amended on our service charge to them for the works that they carry out.
And if I add two things myself, one is that the earliest this is going to come, one of the reasons for getting a consultant in this, because there is some specialist expertise here that we need to actually help us develop this in the right way. The second is, and I really do not want to address this in this meeting, is where we started from, is the implications of devolution, because the whole position of the PFI contract is something that will need to be addressed through both devolution and LGR, and I'm not sure there are answers in this room at this moment about how all of that is going to play out. I'm seeing a sea of shaking heads from the officers at the back, so I'm going to move on from that one. Anything else?
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, it then sort of means that that paragraph 5.3 is what you're actually talking about. We haven't worked it out yet in terms of, it says that there are current PFI contractual arrangements with regards to income that need to be finalised prior to implementation. I presume that's what you mean, yeah. Because we're talking about £700,000 income kind of, but it may not be 700,000, but not massively less than that in terms of what we could get.
And we make no promises that it's going to be the 700,000 as well. That's another thing.
It's an aspiration.
Well, I would say it's telling you that the number is likely not to be 70,000 or 7 million, but we are resolutely unsure about what that number is at that moment. Stacey, you're about to come in, or have I stolen your thunder?
No, it was just to make a point that regarding income currently, COLAS do take control of income, and that's, for instance, via the permit scheme. So that is something that will need to be changed prior to implementation.
Just to say that, yes, I don't have any problem supporting this. It's a good way forward.
I do so hate this. In short, unless there are any more comments to be made, I'm going to accept the recommendations in this report, and we'll come back with more information when we get closer to the event. Okay. I hope I've folded over my corners of my pad correctly, and we're now moving on to school streets, St Jude School and the ETRO decision. And for that, I think, Ian, you're going to talk to us.
Good afternoon. This report is providing an update on the School Streets ETRO, Experimental Traffic Regulation Order on St Jude's C of E Primary School. It seeks that the Cabinet member makes the ETRO permanent, aligning with Portsmouth City Council's Council's Local Transport Plan, LTP4, objectives, and encouraging active travel, supporting modal shift and creating safer, healthier routes to school. Just a bit of a background on school streets. Obviously, it's about removing vehicles from the streets straight outside of schools, enabling parents and kids to walk, cycle and scoot to school. It's had a lot of positive outcomes. It creates a very much safer environment. The school streets in St Jude's in particular has had a raised zebra crossing added, many play zones around the routes as well, and has been widely accepted by the parents and children at the school. It's encouraged a lot of cycling and walking amongst them. It has come with its challenges, compliance issues, especially during the lovely UK weather we get sometimes. And there is a need for enforcement from us, which we want to look further into. Again, I mentioned this had a lot of strong support from parents, residents and obviously the local authority. It does require continued engagement from the ARSAT team, which is myself and Natalia. And yes, so recommendations is to make the ETRO permanent with maintaining support from the Road Safety and Active Travel team.
Any questions? It's a topic we've addressed before, but any questions about this report?
Just one question. On 6.6, you talk about pursuing ANPR camera enforcement. I'll just either, well, when might that be possible to do, and what's the Vivacity cameras? I'm not quite sure what that is and how they work. What are they doing? Are they continuously monitoring the street or something, or what?
Do you want to take that one in?
Well, as you may well be aware, we've just got Part 6 powers for moving traffic enforcement, so we're in the process with a project manager exploring further ANPR use. And the Vivacity camera explores pedestrian, cycle and car movement around the area, so we can get a sort of before and after data for when we possibly put this data in. But it's gathering valuable information about transport to and from school at the moment.
Councillor Bosher.
Thank you, Peter. From the outset, as far as I'm concerned, it's very much a localised thing, so I'm supportive because it's the local residents who have actually done it. I'm actually looking at the integrated impact assessment. That's what I'm looking at. And one of them, how are you going to measure, check the impact of your proposal? And we've written in there road safety statistics. Now, this is a very small area. What are the road safety statistics for that area before this actually took place? There's got to be something.
What we take into account is also the near misses which are reported. So it's not only the casualty data, because this is very small area. It's the same as at every other school. So usually there is no casualty data at schools, which is very good, because it means that there is no serious accidents. However, one of the things which we work on is parents and school reporting the near misses. And for example, in St. Jude's, and at many other schools, one of the things which we've noticed that every single time our officers are at particular school, there is a near miss which we observe, which very often is not looked at by parents as a near miss. However, for us, because we know what we're looking for, it is a near miss. So comparing what we've seen before and what we're seeing now, we would be able to compare. Obviously, this is the data which we kind of keep for ourselves within the team. However, this is partly the data which is observations. However, partly there is a near miss tool as well, which people can actually report near misses which they see on the road, could be pedestrian or bicycle.
So I'm about to go down a rabbit hole, I think. The near-miss reporting, as I understand it, is to do with cycling predominantly and that perception. So when we put road safety measures, and arguably this could be classed as one in place, it is based on actual statistics, not near misses. So if we have an accident black spot, we look to do something about it. And I've come across that again several times in my ward where I've tried to get road safety in there, and I've always had the answer back, you can't have anything there because the statistics say nothing's actually happening there. So I'm looking at this one and say, well, there's been no accidents in this place. There's not likely to be any accidents going forward. So how can we measure 0 against 0 as a mean to check and impact the proposals? Perhaps it's a moot point on my part, but can you see where I'm coming from? So it would have to be based on actual data and not perceived near misses, because that's how we do it from a vehicular point of view as I understand it. If we are going to go down the near miss route as being a perceived reason for actually building up statistics to justify something, then I think we're looking at some sort of separate policy that says that's how we actually judge it. Because as I said, I've had safety improvements pushed back on in my ward on the basis there's not been any accidents there. The fact that people almost get run over there on a regular basis and there for the grace of God, you know, what do we want? Do we want a child knocked down before we do something, or are we going to look at near misses? So I think there's something different, and perhaps I'm disappearing down a slightly different rabbit hole here, but if we have a set of criteria to decide one thing, we can't then adopt a second separate set of criteria that isn't part of a policy to judge something like this. Not that I disagree with what we're looking to do here anyway. The other one I've got is the air quality one. Will it improve the air quality? Please expand on the impact. Restricting motor vehicle access and promoting active travel will translate to lower emissions and pollutants due to less cars in the area and less idling. Yep, you're probably right. But again, we're looking at a small area here. Question, is there an air quality monitoring station within this area that's actually monitoring this? Because if there isn't, how do we actually know the answer to this going forward? And secondly, when you monitor the air quality, or you talk in terms of improved air quality, are you talking exclusively in the area that we're looking at? Because certainly you are, because arguably you're going to have a bigger build-up of traffic on the fringes of that area. So you might have a clean air point there, but you might have increased dirty air just on the outside of it. And it's trying to understand how we're actually justifying an improvement in air quality on that basis.
If I jump in, I think we have to kind of be open about where the evidence base for some of these things will be, because we won't have the ability to measure exactly the way that you are rightly saying the challenge could go.
I think,
and I'm sure you understand that.
I do, and perhaps I'm asking slightly loaded questions, because I do read these sorts of things from time to time, and I think we put very black and white answers in these, arguably, and I'm not being disrespectful, sometimes it's probably cut and paste when you've got something similar, but if somebody was to say, prove it, I don't think we can in some of these instances, or we find it very difficult to actually do that. And that's probably my point, the fact that we need to give a bit more consideration as to the fact that if some crusty old councillor from Drayton Farnington is going to say, prove it, you like to be led by evidence as well, you've said yourself, then you've got to be able to demonstrate that.
Or confess the limits to your knowledge.
One of the things we actually put quite a lot of pressure on is actually collating the data. So in a previous report, which was the data from before and during the first 6 months of the consultation, there was a lot of data on the number of cars and vehicles in the area and so on and so on. This report, there is a small snapshot. However, the table yes, on the page 5. Yeah, so for example, this one actually shows you the number of vehicles. So for example, if we had before 130 vehicles and it dropped to 42, obviously those vehicles, you know, they still had to get to school, so they were still driving on those surrounding roads. So what's happening at that moment is they don't get as far as the school. So, you know, like what you actually end up with, the road closest to the school does not have the fumes, and the school which is leading to the school, the main road, has exactly the same as it used to have, because the same people are driving on the same road, just park away. So they just don't park this 200 meters from, park 100 to 100 meters from the school.
And if I was to challenge that to help Councillor Bosher along, because I suspect I'm going to agree with some of what he's saying, we won't be able to prove that we haven't created a new hotspot somewhere else. There could be words in here that we believe that this is. And if I look at the question, lower car use and no idling will impact on the quality of air in the restricted area, it's we believe it will not. And actually, if you did the full report, it would, based on widespread studies that have shown in an overall area. And so maybe we need to be cautious in the way we express some of these things.
I think you're probably right, Pete. And again, I can use a school in my local area. There's not, in Eveleigh Road, I've got a junior school. And it wouldn't ever be suited to a low traffic neighbourhood operation by any stretch of the imagination. But you get the cars that park in all the adjacent roads, and they start to park there from 2:30 in the afternoon, and sometimes they're sitting with their engines running and all that sort of stuff, particularly in the cold weather and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I guess I come back to the fact that this was an ETRO, so we were going to be looking for evidence to justify it going forward. And the evidence is clearly observational by officers that were there. It's probably coming back from the schools, and it's also from the table in 5.2.2, which clearly demonstrates that it's working. That evidence is all there, and again, I don't disagree with it. But in the impact assessment, if we're talking about things like air quality and accident statistics and stuff like that, then we also need to be looking to evidence that during the ETRO period at the same time, in my opinion, if it's at all possible to do that.
Right, but Felicity, you're waving.
Yeah, thank you. I think they're really good points you raised today, and I just wanted to add 2 points of clarification. So on our PCC website, we do have report engine idling, which is citywide, So members of the public can report if there are engine idling issues, and that is part of our clean air objectives around the clean air zone. And I can circulate the links after the meeting today. And just to clarify the point on the near-miss reporting, it is both for pedestrians and cyclists that you can report any near misses across the city, and we use both as our evidence base along with the statistics to formulate evidence-based decisions. So there are a number of intel that we use to formulate recommendations going forward. So just wanted to reiterate those points, and as I say, I'll share them after the meeting so you have them.
No, we need a remote system where I can be switched on and off by someone who does that well. Okay, so, yes, training for the chair, an electric chair. Okay, so let's back to serious and let us push through because time is getting on. Any more questions? Any more comments? My only additional comment to what we've said already is I think what we're seeing, I think everyone is supportive of the direction we're going in here. I think we've recognised in doing this that actually there are a lot of challenges and it's very unique to the place, and so we need to work towards finding something that can work for every school, and some schools will do different things. But beyond that, I'm going to accept the report as it is and move us on. So we're now going to move to TROs, and talking to this one is Denise. Is it you?
It is indeed. Thank you. So yes, this report is to consider the objections that have been received to Traffic Regulation Order reference P003, which was advertised to introduce 28 disabled parking bays and remove 12 disabled parking bays in various roads in Portsmouth. We received 5 responses relating to 5 disabled bay locations, namely Balliol Road, Brompton Road, Grunison Road, Hampshire Street and Carron Avenue. Just as a bit of clarification, Brompton Road and Grunison Road are in existing residence parking zones, the ME Hazelmere Road and FJ Stamshaw North, and Hampshire Street will be in the GC Shearer Road zone, which is going live next week. Both Balliol Road and Carron Avenue are not within residence parking zones. The objections that we received were, so for Balliol Road, the objection received related to concerns over the parking bay partially extending across the next property, and concern that the applicant of the disabled bay has a number of vehicles that they move around, and suggesting that they make sure they can always park a vehicle outside their house. On Brompton Road, the concerns were made on the grounds of more parking space being lost. Grunison Road, again, objection was made over concerns about the number of vehicles at the address and that the disabled bay may be used to carry out repairs to vehicles. Hampshire Street, again, objection made about the number of vehicles at the property and feels that the disabled bay is not evenly distributed. Obviously, in terms of where the bays get distributed, it depends on the actual width of the property, which some properties in Portsmouth, as we know, is only 4 metres. The minimum length we can have for a disabled bay is 5 metres, so sometimes they will have to extend across to another property. Just very brief, all applicants for disabled bays have to have a blue badge and a vehicle registered to the address. They're already likely to be parking in those rows where they live, so in real terms there's actually no loss of parking space. We have to take into consideration they all have difficulties whilst walking and will therefore benefit from a disabled bay close to or outside where they live, thereby minimising the distance they have to walk from parking their car to where they live. And therefore it's recommended that the Cabinet Member for Transport approves the implementation of the disabled persons parking bays in Balliol Road, Brompton Road, Grunison Road, Hampshire Street and Carron Avenue. The remainder of the traffic regulation order for the bays that we didn't receive objections to has already been implemented under a Part A order, and if these bays are agreed, it will be implemented under a Part B order. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
I do have one, and again, I'm not going to object to any of them because they are where it's at. But I'd just be very interested because certainly when I read the representation on Balliol Road and the other one with the, can't remember which one it was, using it to fix cars. Do we actually investigate that, or is it the fact that they are a blue badge applicant is the overriding thing that dictates whether they can have a bay or not, other than perhaps the road condition?
Yeah, I mean, we do take that. We will look into that separately, if you like. I don't think it has any bearing on whether they should have a disabled bay, but we have looked at the concerns raised over where vehicles are being repaired on. I mean, if somebody just does repairs onto their own vehicle on a road, then that's generally okay. But obviously, if they're doing it more regularly or potentially as a business, that gets looked at separately. We have raised that as a concern on one of them, but as I said, in terms of whether they're eligible for a disabled bay and whether that should be implemented, that's not taken into consideration in that decision-making process. But we do look at those, and we will investigate if there are concerns raised.
So I think it's a two-step process. So that your first one is, if you apply and you meet the criteria, the chances are you're going to get your disabled bay, subject to the usual kind of stuff. Separately, if through the process concerns are raised, you know, that's kind of a light flashing on the control panel to take some other step, and I know we definitely do enforcement of these things.
Sorry, I was just going to. Yeah, I totally understand that the qualification for a blue badge is the overriding factor, and then physically whether the disabled bay can go. Because I think we've had times in the past where can't go directly outside your house for whatever reason, but we can move it slightly round the corner and all that sort of stuff to make it available. It was more about blue badge abuse and how we actually do that, because not quite the same scenario, but I can go to my local Sainsbury's, which is the same Sainsbury's that Graham tends to use, and you can see workers' transit vans parked in disabled spaces with a disabled badge on it, and you know, it's full up with tools, nuts, lots of other bits and pieces, and you're sitting there thinking, really, you know, and I just wondered how we actually, I appreciate that's a supermarket scenario, that if you've got a transit van with Bob the Builder written on the side of it, covered in scaffolding or whatever, with a disabled badge on it, because they're using the space, do we actually investigate that sort of thing to see whether it's actually legitimate, or do we just say there is a badge there, therefore we can't touch it?
I think the first thing just to point out is actually a blue badge is for a person rather than a vehicle, so it can be used in any vehicle that they're travelling in. With regard to our disabled bays, our requirement is that it actually, as long as a vehicle is registered to the address, then that's when they can, so it doesn't, the blue badge holder doesn't have to be a driver, because a large number of blue badge holders aren't drivers, but somebody else supporting them at the property will be a driver, but they have to have a vehicle there. But a blue badge can be used in absolutely any vehicle, and it could be that somebody else is taking them out and in, you know, and using another type of vehicle to actually help transport them. It's, you know, we don't have any requirement, and we can't actually insist that they only use them in certain types of vehicles, etc. So it's.
But I think that it is worth putting something on the record, because it's something I was very keen to hear, is that actually Portsmouth has a pretty tight policy, and we make a point of celebrating, as it were, when there are prosecutions for people who have been found to be using their blue badge wrongly, because there is kind of like a second-hand market for such things, and therefore, you know, we are always open to listening to hear that there is a particular problem, and where there is strong evidence, you know, we will go and have a look at that. Delise, you want to just talk to that for a moment?
Yeah, we've obviously successfully prosecuted a number of people for misuse of blue badges. A large number of them have been where the badges have been stolen. They're using them, the badges, belongs to the person has passed away, the badge hasn't been returned, or it's being used by people who are not entitled to use that badge because they're not supporting the blue badge holder at the time. So it's something we very actively do in Portsmouth, and we're actually one of the leading authorities. We're actually applying to become a beacon authority for blue badge enforcement. So, but yes, we're very strong on that.
Because it's an issue of trust.
That's been happening for years. I mean, I was whenever we were active when I was the cabinet member, and whenever we got somebody through the court system, it was like press release, off you go. Let's send out that signal. And I don't think that policy's changed at all over the years.
Anything else? Okay, in that case, I'm happy to take the recommendations as expressed and move on to the next item, which is broken my pack apart now. If I'm not wrong, it is the last item on our agenda. Is that correct? Someone who has a properly intact pack? Eleni, I'm not going to give you the introduction you should probably give, but it will be this is why I don't use the paper. It is about our tertiary road network and a change in policy to how we cover it. And if you would like to read out the title of that as the first action you do, I would be grateful.
Yes, thank you. The title is Tertiary Road Inspection and Repair Program. So basically this is an information paper to inform about the proposed program of works on the tertiary road network regarding the PFI Network Fund. Also in there we've got the associated program of works outside the PFI Network Fund. This is a fund, a PCC fund, and also amendments to the assessment approach that we're using, which allow us to exceptionally include aesthetics and rideability as a more flexible methodology approach.
It's a page burner, this one, but does anyone have any questions on this? Essentially, it's okay.
Apparently, I've gained a road in Hilsey. On the last page, Webley Grove, that's Cosham, that's not Hilsey. The last page, year 2025, the ward, you've got the final page, Webley Grove, that's not Hilsey.
Apologies, I will correct that.
Just like a clarification about the two appendices. The Appendix B talks about tertiary road network fund proposed schemes, and Appendix B talks about tertiary fund network budget. But there aren't any budget figures, they're just a series of roads. So can you clarify the difference between the network fund proposed schemes and the network budget?
So the network PFI fund, the tertiary road network PFI fund, is related to the contract. So this is a fund that is between ourselves and COLAS that sits within the it is within a contractual arrangement. At the moment, the budget for that is around about 900K. Roundabout, yes. And then the other one is a budget that the council has approved that we can use in order to use the additional methodology and also assist us to include more roads for resurfacing.
To be more helpful in the future, it might be worth putting Appendix B, Tertiary Road Network Fund Proposed Schemes PFI, and Tertiary Road Network Council budget, so that we are absolutely clear which one is which, because I think there was one of my colleagues asked a question on an email and I thought, oh, I'm not quite sure, I'll have to go and check that. So that's all. The other thing I wanted to raise as well, I mean, one of my colleagues did raise a particular issue about a road in their ward, Fernhurst Road, about why it wasn't on the programme. Some considerable time ago, when Councillor Stagg was the Cabinet member, and if he was here, he'd remember this. Councillor Brian Medrick asked a question about roads in Paulsgrove, and I followed it up with a supplementary question asking whether, in fact, it would be possible for COLAS to provide elected members with like a summary of road condition, maybe once a year, about what the state of the roads in their ward are, with a view to like, because residents will ask about a road, and why isn't so-and-so road being done? You know, and if we could just refer to a document and say, actually, it's been inspected, and it's considered, you know, fine, or it's deteriorating, or whatever. It'd be really helpful, because then it would save us having to email officers saying, what's the station of this road, you know, find out that. We never got that, although the cabinet member did promise to do it, we never eventually got it. And I have asked a couple of times, and I'm just wondering if there is a practical problem about providing that for members. Obviously, roads conditions change over time. You don't want, you know, a report every month, because that would be ridiculous. But maybe at least once a year, a roundup of our roads, so we could go through our roads and see whether they're likely to be repaired, you know, soon, or in a position where they're, you know, getting to be considered or whatever. It would be really helpful.
Do you want to talk to kind of what the inspection process is and how that is done? Because I think that bears on Councillor Heaney's question.
Yes, that the inspection methodology was included in the previous report, but obviously we do inspect 25% of the tertiary roadwork every year, and that is a visual inspection. Also, in there we also include in the methodology if there are any complaints logged from residents, if there's appearance of potholes, if it is close to schools or other areas of importance, and this is how then the method we derive to a log of specific roads that we're taking forward for consideration. Obviously, after that, because it is an extensive list, then we have collective site visits between ourselves and COLAS, and from these site visits, when we have a second visual inspection, then we produce a program of works.
I understand the process. It's a question about access to the information for elected members in their wards. Like, how can I find out about Nelson Road, for example, in my ward, as to what its current condition is, apart from sending an email to somebody who I'm not quite sure who I would ask about that with them, but, you know, find out who it is, ask them the question, then they come back and say, well, it's okay, or, yeah, but it was inspected on whenever, or whatever. I don't, you know, that's the sort of information that would be really useful for us. And to be able to refer to, and obviously sometimes when we're walking around, we might think, this road looks a bit like, could do with some work. Let's go and check the list, you know, when it was done. Is it feasible to provide this information? I'm happy with the process. I understand the process. The question is whether, is there any point at which the information will be available for members to look at or to refer to through a spreadsheet or whatever that we could have access to?
I think that might need a bit of thinking about, because we would have to be very careful about doing it, because it is a, you know, it's a constant process of assessment, and things might change, and we all know that things might get locked in, that people have a perception that it is such and such, and it will then be done at such and such a point in time. Until you get quite close to the point and you actually put together the programme, I don't know whether we would have that for kind of every road in the city. If you're asking on a road-by-road basis, that is clearly going to give you the answer for what that road is at that point in time, but it's not even then necessarily going to know when that is going to then be addressed. Because if you were a medium priority at this point in time, it isn't simply that you'll kind of go through the things and eventually you'll be a top priority road, because it might be that other things come in over the top of that, and you might remain in the medium priority or something along those lines. Yeah, I think...
I'm not expecting an answer now. Come back to
Felicity.
me.
Yeah, I was just going to say, can I suggest that we take that one away? Unfortunately, Martin Lavers, who's the Assistant Director for the area, couldn't be here today. So I suggest if we take that away, we'll ask Martin the question, and then we can respond outside the meeting, if that's okay, noting it's an information-only item.
Yeah.
Thank you.